Hey everybody, this is another episode of PT Outcast, and this is another season of PT Outcast. So welcome, I'm Eric Robertson, and I'm here today with my good friend Carly Lochala. And Carly is, this is the big announcement of today's episode for season 2. We're going to be moving forward with a co-host, and Carly is the co-host. So officially welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining me. It's a lot more fun to talk to somebody instead of to myself. So thanks for being here.
Always happy to be another way to collaborate with you, Eric. I'm always happy to be in the room, hanging out, whether it's a virtual room or an actual room, with you. But super excited to kind of talk about all things related to PT and maybe not PT sometimes, depending on how the conversation goes here in PT Outcast.
Yeah, I desperately want PT Outcast to really dive into art at some point, like a little bit more into the humanities and get off of the PT stuff. But I'm a pretty big PT nerd, so it's hard for me to stop it totally and talk about the art stuff. Um, Maybe later, in a few episodes, we're going to be hosting the Uprising, which is the Environmental Physical Therapy Association worldwide global event to talk about the environment and environmental PT and sustainability in practice. Maybe that would be a nice time to have a podcast episode that wasn't totally about PT.
Something a little different flavor. I love it.
Yeah. So introduce yourself to the folks of our audience. I know you for a long time, and I could probably introduce you a little bit, but I think you would do a better job. But I'll tell people where I know Carly from, which is a long time ago. She showed up online and was a co-faculty in a pharmacology course that I was teaching, and so we got to work together. And it was like this gift had appeared in the course, and it was amazing. We got to know each other. We taught it for a long time, and so since then we've just been growing together. So Carly, tell everybody, like, what's your gig? What have you done? What are you doing?
Sure. Well, so I am a neuro PT by training, and I work with patients with all kinds of neurologic disorders, but lately at Balancing Act Rehab, focusing on chronic dizziness as our main sort of thing. But I love seeing and diving into all things PT, but especially all things neuro. So I am a very like loud and proud neuro nerd. And so that's my lens. But then I got really into teaching. And so back when I first joined that pharmacology course, that was my real, so I would say first real foray into like higher education teaching. And I learned so much, and it was so fun to be in the room, and I just wanted more, and found myself really wanting to dive in and explore. And here we are today collaborating on Brainsmith education, where we're really kind of diving into that together and exploring what it looks like to really find excellence in higher education in health sciences. So super fun.
Yeah, it's super fun, and thanks for bringing up Brainsmith. So if you haven't already seen our social media posts related or other social media posts, Carly and I are forming a new company called Brainsmith, and Brainsmith is about education. It's an education company, and so we've been doing some webinars about AI for health science educators. It's been pretty fun doing that, but we're going to branch out from the AI stuff, and we're going to expand that and talk about faculty development in general, and we'll have some clinical offerings as well. So we have a pretty big vision for Brainsmith, and I feel really lucky to find again a way to collaborate with you. So right back at you.
Yeah, so fun.
Yeah. So to this end, this episode was very nerdy, very PT nerdy, and we basically collaborated with another group of colleagues that are also forming an education business, and our missions were so aligned, and we're all friends, and we said, hey, let's come together and have some conversation. And so this episode is the first of 3 episodes where we're going to collaborate with the group from Trellis Ed, and that group is Elise Ruckert and Libby Krause. So Elise is I'm going to hopefully get this right. She's associate professor at USC. She's the director of the student mentorship program at USC, and she's also the chair of the education research lab there. And she is pretty active with the education section, and is an author on a book, which she will happily show you later in the podcast. And we'll put a link to it in the show notes. So she's been doing a lot of education stuff. She's got an EDD, um, and she's a go-getter. And then also with Libby Krause, who is an adjunct faculty at USC. She's done some really neat things at USC, like she's helped develop and lead a leadership program there for all the faculty, which was really fantastic. And then she is doing instructional design and faculty development at Trellis Edge, where she helped co-found with Elise. So uh, really some folks that are thinking a lot about education. And our 3 series, we're going to go over some different things, but in this one we started out talking about faculty development and how people learn how to teach. So our episode was pretty fun to go through. We got to some places I didn't think we'd get to, but Carly, what stood out? What was awesome about the episode?
I love hearing an origin story. And it was so interesting how all of our education origin stories were different, right? Everyone
Yeah.
finds their own path to get eventually to a higher education position, whether like you knew from the beginning, I want this, to, I wasn't sure I ever wanted this, but here I am. And so I love hearing the origin story really stood out to me. And yeah, that was, I think, probably the most exciting and interesting to hear all these different paths and the different ways in which we've gotten training and learned how to be good educators. I also liked learning about some of the different things that Elise and Libby and you have done in your careers to get to where you are.
Yeah, well, what was interesting to me is we kind of got lucky with like a sampling because, I really didn't have any formal training in teaching. And, on the, and you and Libby were sort of in between on that. And then Elise was like really formal in her training right away. So we had like a full spectrum of experiences to talk about, but I think we were all equally afraid at first. So that was pretty cool. I like, we talked a few things about in this episode that stood out to me. One was about the ethics of including adjunct faculty in development programs. That one really stood out to me. And then we ended up with this conversation about how morale can be boosted, right? And that's kind of an important thing. Think about as people struggle with workloads and pay and even inflation, all these things that are going on. So it was pretty cool. So we're going to talk about faculty development in this first episode, and then we're going to move on from there. We're going to talk about belonging and what it's like to be a distance faculty, since we've all had a lot of experience being distance faculty. And then we're going to talk about just big challenges, big picture things facing DPT education for the final of these 3 episodes, which there's a lot of things that DPT education is struggling with right now. So we'll dig into it. But without further ado, Carly, I think we should get over to the episode and
I
let
think
people
so.
hear the fun.
Enjoy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thanks everybody, and we'll see you next time. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of PT Outcast. This episode is exciting because it starts our 2nd season, and it's also exciting because there's more cool people here. So we have Carly Lochala, and we have Elise Ruckert and Libby Krause. And Elise and Libby are collaborating on a business effort called Trellis Ed. And as you know, Carly and I are collaborating on Brainsmith. And so we thought, since both of these efforts are centered around education and training and development, it might be really nice to like come together and talk about all the things in the educational landscape and see where that takes us. And so this episode today, we're going to talk about faculty development, and it'll start off our conversation, and over the next couple episodes, we'll see where it takes us. So it'll be a good time. So welcome everybody to the podcast and to season 2 of PT Outcast. And first, we'll start with a few little introductions so that everybody knows who we're talking to. So Elise, you want to go first?
Sure. Thanks, Eric. I am a self-proclaimed pedagogy nerd. Love talking anything related in teaching and learning, whether it's with a coffee mug or a glass of wine. So really excited for our conversation today.
Yeah, great. Thanks. Libby?
Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Eric. My name is Libby Krause, and I my biggest passion right now is instructional design. So I've come to this from a variety of different places, but sort of bringing together my educator experience and graphic design experience and other arts experience. So yeah, it's really exciting to be sort of on the verge of this new stuff.
Yeah, great. And Carly?
Hi, folks. I'm Carly Lochala, and I am a clinician turned mostly educator, but still a little bit of a clinician. And I am a little bit obsessed with the concept of the safe space for learning and figuring out how to craft spaces so that students will take risks. So I'm excited to talk about lots of different stuff and like different flavors of education today.
Great. And the 3 of them didn't say this, probably because they're too gentle about the earth, but I want to say that they're all very dedicated and excellent in what they do. I've had the great joy to work alongside these folks for a number of years, and I can't be more thrilled to have this conversation and these series of conversations. So yeah, let's get going. So I was thinking about how we kick into this conversation about faculty development, and it could be a little bit boring if you talk just about faculty development. So I thought we should start with some storytelling, because stories are cool. Even if they're about boring things, you can make them cool. So for me, it didn't feel boring when I was learning how to teach. It felt sort of like scary. And so I want to start with that kind of story. So I would love it. Like, Carly, can you share like what it was like for you to learn how to teach? How did you learn how to teach? What was your faculty development pathway?
Sure. So this was sort of an interesting path, I would say. So for me personally, but when I first was getting into teaching, I actually was only a year and a half out of school and was working in an acute care hospital. And one of my coworkers had been a course director for a course at a kinesiology course at a community college for like PTA, OTA, massage therapy students. And she couldn't teach it that term. And she's like, "Hey, do you want to teach this?" And I was like, "Sure." And so then I was handed an entire course to teach, having zero teaching experience beyond like being a anatomy TA in a PT school. So that was really interesting and kind of hard, I think, to step in without any real teaching training. So figured it out. Students did fine. It was overall good, but I really realized I kind of liked it. And I'd been actually sort of actively fighting to not be a teacher. My mom's a teacher, my sister's in education, and my mom was like, "You make a great teacher." And I'm like, "No, I won't, Mom. I'm not going to do it." And then I was like, "Oh, I kind of like this." So that was what actually put me on a path toward residency. And I specifically picked the residency that I chose. I went to USC Rancho Los Amigos for my neuro residency because they had a mentorship in teaching component as part of the residency. So that was really important to me in selection. And then that's where I first started to get a little bit of training and feedback and mentorship there. And then eventually was able to get back connected and start my teaching journey with USC. So
Yeah, great.
yeah.
So you started teaching, somebody gave you a course, you hadn't really gotten any training about how to teach, and you're just like,
No, not
go
at all.
do it. And then you're
Yep.
like, I should probably learn how to do this.
Yeah, exactly. And I was like, "Oh, I kind of like this, but I know I'm not the best that I could be. Like, how do I get better at this?" And I think we've all probably had this experience of having had really good professors and really terrible professors along the journey and figuring out how do I become the good one. Right away, I recognized, and I do a lot of like probably too much self-reflection, but I'm like, all right, I could do this better. How can I do this better? And so then I wanted someone kind of looking over my shoulder to help me
Yeah,
with that. Yeah.
great. Libby, how about you?
Yeah, it's funny when you ask that, I think, well, in second grade, because I remember truly in second grade, we did this like project where the whole class was a city and everyone got a job and I was the teacher. And like I wanted to be a teacher and then like, divert to other things, went to PT school, obviously. Grew up, was a clinician, blah, 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 blah. But I remember also like when I had friends doing the residency at USC, I was like, "Oh, it's exciting for you because you get to teach." And they were like, "I don't want to teach." And I was genuinely confused. I was like, "Wait, why are you, there are people, you're doing this, but you don't want to teach it?" I'm actually confused.
So you don't understand the reluctant educator part of Carly.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, part of it too, right, is like, I don't think I understood the real breadth of what it means to be like an academic. And I have mostly avoided that, like by being part-time and not having a lot of other responsibilities outside of the teaching piece. Yeah, I've always wanted to do this and I didn't. And the more I do it, the more I realize that like this is absolutely what I should be doing. And it feels kind of weird to be like, you went to 3 years of a doctoral program now to like not be practicing. But this is what I'm supposed to be doing. I like just, this is what I love. And I also find it interesting, Carly, talking about like how unprepared we are, right? I feel like I talk about this a lot. The idea that like the higher the level of education, the less trained the educator. Like my preschoolers teachers have more training in how to teach people than I did when I started teaching, which is just kind of wild to think about.
Yeah,
That is
true.
really, I actually never thought about that perspective, but that's, I mean, that's totally true, right? To like, to be a teacher in grammar school or preschool, you have to go through these preceptorships and get all these certifications and holy cow. Huh.
But then they just hand you a class.
Yeah.
And you're training people who are going to be like healthcare clinicians. Yeah.
Good. So okay. So Carly's the reluctant educator. Libby learned how to walk and then just stated her inclination to teach. Elise, what's your path? How did you learn how to teach? What was your development route?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't even know that I was going to end up in the classroom. Kind of like Carly, I had a family of educators, so maybe it's somewhere in the blood. But I wanted to do a neuro residency to get more expertise in working with neurologic patient populations, and the teaching part just happened to be a piece, right? And so I started, preparing for one of our first lab teaching sessions, and got up there and did it with my residents, and I loved it. It was so fun. And the our teaching mentor at the time came over and was like, have you taught before? This is like very natural for you. You should really think about it. Considering more teaching. And I love that now, thinking about students in this role and the power of mentorship, right? Like this person just happened to say, hey, you should think about this, and look at what that did for me. So I had some teaching training as a resident. And then when I did my time with adjuncting and had a little bit of a clinical faculty role for a bit, but it was really when I got into my full-time academic teaching position at George Washington University that I did teaching fellowship. And that was right out of the gate. I was brought on as an assistant professor, and they really encouraged me to do this year-long graduate it was a graduate certificate in education. And that really laid the foundation for me in terms of training moving forward.
Okay. So when you were applying for that position, had you had any training in teaching?
Not formal, no,
Yeah.
just
So
residency.
fascinating.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, really cool. But it does explain a lot that you got like properly trained right away. Maybe I understand why you're so smart at this now. So yeah. So my story, it's interesting. I actually want to revise my story from what I originally thought I was going to say in this bit, because when Libby talked about like, teaching when she was 2 years old, I thought, well, oh, wait, when did I actually start teaching the first time I started teaching things? And for me, it was in PT school. And so I had a unique opportunity. Like two of my very best friends were the kind of students that were sort of like bouncing along the low end of the GPA spectrum, where like you're safe or you have to repeat things. And so they were like just there. And so what I would do is I would learn what I needed to learn in class. And then my method of studying was to go teach them. And I would reteach the information to them. And so I started learning about what worked and what didn't work in terms of explaining physical therapy concepts to these folks, right? And I had some advantages in the sense that I had been, as a patient, as a volunteer, I'd been around PT for many years at that point. But then if you fast forward from that to when I started teaching, kind of the same thing that you experienced, where I started and I got into a course and I was like, had no skill teaching, no training in teaching. And I just started going. And I guess I have less than you all have. Like I never did a residency, and I taught for several years, but I was lucky enough to be around people who knew the science of teaching. Right. So, I'll never forget the first person I taught with, like from a practice perspective, from like an orthopedic management perspective, we couldn't have been more opposite. And her, quite honestly, this person's perspective drove me nuts, but she was really good at teaching. And thankfully I had like the patience to see like, okay, here's what I can extract from this. And so, things like mapping exams to the course content and, how important syllabi was and constant like note taking and all those little things that I would have never had any idea how to do. I learned a lot from this person. And then from there, I was just lucky to be around people that really knew what they were doing with teaching, had a lot of experience in academia. And so I eventually adopted some things that were maybe better practice than others. So, this theme is like, okay, people start, they're clinicians and they want to teach, which is awesome. And they come in and they have all of this powerful clinical knowledge and very little knowledge and training and education. And so they often don't get that bridge, right? Like not very many schools say, Elise, go do this fellowship because maybe it doesn't exist, right? Yeah. So,
Right.
Elise, in your role, maybe you have a perspective, like what is more, like what's kind of the norm for faculty development? Like what have you seen? What do people do typically? Like this was our experience, but maybe we're all like, we've been doing it a while. Have we evolved at all?
Oh, I mean, I definitely think there has been evolution, but it's more recent evolution. I think, for many, many years in the field, it was just, kind of come in and here's the course you're going to teach and it's learn by doing. And maybe as part of your university, like university-wide orientation, there's a talk by the Center for Teaching and Learning there to make sure hey, this is a resource and you can access it. And I know, and that actually is, part of the way it was for me when I started out. But since then, gosh, there's been a lot of momentum, I feel like, especially within the APTA, the Academy of Education, in terms of trying to provide more resources, especially as we're seeing this program growth, right? Program proliferation.
Mm-hmm.
And so what comes to mind for me is that now we're seeing certificate programs where the Academy of Education now has an Educator Excellence certificate where folks can go into the Learning Center and take courses to have more experience related to teaching or formal learning related to teaching. The Academy also has a new educator workshop. I teach for a sister new faculty development workshop by Pagliarulo and Associates, and those are like multi-day, right? Come and learn and prepare for what it means to be a teacher. I know EIM also has, an education, like an educator's training kind of series. And so I think we're seeing that there's more becoming available. And luckily, a lot of this does have an online option now for folks that aren't able to carve out, multiple days to go somewhere and sit in. But this is definitely an area where we need to see more ongoing faculty development opportunities, not just these, standalone formalized courses or workshops, at least the way I see it.
Yeah. I guess one thing that struck me about those things that you were talking about is that there's all sort of like kind of external things, right? Like I can go to this provider and consume this, or I can go to that provider and consume this. But there's also a component of faculty development that has a lot to do with like learning inside the fabric of the institution that you're in, right?
Absolutely, right? Understanding the culture, understanding what the values are around teaching, right? The model. There's a lot of curricular delivery models, and the way that you show up and teach within those is really important.
Yeah.
And different.
Yeah. Did anyone, I don't know if the audience knows this, but I know you all through work at USC, and USC has that Center for Excellence in Teaching and Instruction. I think that's the name of it. Did anybody interact with that group at all? It's like a thing on campus that, yeah. Okay. Tell us about it. Yeah.
I did the faculty fellowship with CET.
Mhm.
So it's a year-long a course, really, but it's, you do asynchronous content and then it's discussion based and it's with faculty all over the university, and you're nominated by your like division chair or dean to do it. And yeah, I mean, I didn't mention this as part of my story about how I got to here and where I learned to teach, but interestingly, so many of my immediate mentors had already been through it.
Mm.
And so, and I'd been learning from them for, I don't know, 7 years. And so then when I got into that, it felt sort of like a formality. Like I knew most of the stuff that they were bringing forth. And all I could think was like, wow, if I'd had this 7 years ago,
Yeah.
it would have brought me up to speed so much faster. But the requirements in place to do it are such that it's hard to do it as new faculty. Like I got really like pushed forward by our chair, but I was part-time at the time, and technically if you're adjunct or part-time, you're not supposed to be eligible. And so, and it is, I will say, like a lot of it is directed towards course leadership. So some of it's like, oh, this is very interesting to me because I've considered being a teacher since I was in 2nd grade, but not because I can go do it tomorrow
Oh,
as
yeah.
if I'm
Right.
in a leadership position, right? Like, yeah, I remember specifically course alignment, like blowing the minds of my cohort members. And I, 1, already knew about it, and 2, didn't really have the power at that time to implement anything about that myself. So anyway, it's a really, really good resource, but I think there's a lot of missed opportunities in terms of when it is available, and thinking about like who is actually like on the ground with the students. And I know that in PT programs, a lot of the time that's the adjunct faculty in that little lab group, right? And how those these resources aren't really built for them.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, like, it's hard to one size this training for, your tenure track faculty and your adjunct faculty and have it fit everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Carly, how did you interact with that group?
Yeah, well, so interesting. So I've had a slightly different experience, and just to speak to what Libby's talking about too, like that training coming a little bit late. One of the criteria is supposed to be people that are going up to be associate level. So it's like minimum 6 years, right? And so I tried to do that institute over and over, but they're like, you're too junior. So I'm like, okay. But what I did actually, there happened to be, and I think this was probably because I don't know if it was because of COVID when everything went online, but through the Center for Excellence in Teaching, they offered a institute for new faculty teaching online, which was a year-long course. So I did that one, and it was more, I would say, entry level in terms of like teaching pedagogy, but then it also had a slight nod to like, okay, also online though. Here's how to do that online. So that was helpful. And I've done a few pretty much for me, because through the CET, as the courses were free, I could just take them. I took as many as I could. So I did one about academic ableism and how to make course documents more accessible. I took one about mastering misconceptions in STEM. So I took as many as I could. And I also took one through through 2U, our like sort of, I don't know exactly what you would call them, but helping manage and put together our online curriculum and like managing that stuff. So I did as many courses as I could, essentially, especially because they were free. So for me, that was made it a lot more enticing, I guess, to sign up for all these things, because I'm like, great, I can do them and it doesn't cost me anything to get this additional training.
Yeah, so you hit on a couple things there. One of them is like a little niche topic about 2U offering training. So that's interesting, right? Because that 2U was the OPM, the online program management provider for USC's hybrid program, and as part of their service, they provide faculty training. Their faculty training was specific, though, to this hybrid pathway and the hybrid delivery, and so it was really useful, though, because they had pulled expertise from their broad collection of programs and then pulled it into USC. The interesting thing I remember having gone through that, though, was that they just knew how to do online teaching. They didn't know how to do online physical therapy teaching. And so a component of our early work was to think about the things they said and then go, now, how does that impact physical therapy, right? So again, you have this external thing where you have to convert it into your institution as like a common thread,
Yeah.
which is interesting. Also through that like development process of the hybrid pathway at USC, that was my first introduction to the power of somebody really learning the skeleton and framework of how to put a course together and how powerful that was, because we were doing translation work where we were taking a residential course and translating it into what that course looked like in terms of a hybrid delivery. And the first couple courses I did, it was work, right? You had to sit and think and like conceptualize these things. And then I got to a course that somebody had just completed a consultancy with this Center for Excellence in Teaching, and they had revised their course. They had made a really good syllabus. They had mapped out all their course objectives. Like everything was aligned in the course. And that was the easiest translation we've ever done. I was like, what is this magic? Right. And it was just like, when a course is in good shape, it's in good shape. Right. And you can do things like translate it, improve it, like iterate it. Like that's when, if you're not struggling with those basics of how to put a course together, that's when you can really elevate your teaching. And I saw that in real time, and it was kind of blew my mind.
I feel like you're touching on something that I think about a lot also, especially in the wake of, USC's hybrid pathway winding down.
Mm-hmm.
That, I still believe that hybrid online education is the future, right? Like to some extent. And so I think that figuring out how to do that well, obviously, is important. In the translation process, one of my biggest projects was translating the neuroclinical management course, which was a just massive job, 5 units, and like just so many skills, like hands-on skills that we had to figure out. How are we going to introduce these? How are we going to then like pull them into our on in-person immersion and stuff like that? And I think that is something that is obviously a barrier for PT, is like, how do we get people to learn these these hands-on skills online? And to me, so much of actual pedagogical principles matter, because they're only going to come in and do it with us once, maybe, right? Or they come in and they do immersion, and it's essentially, we're like, hey, come and cram for this.
Yeah.
We're going to walk you through a nice little cramming session for a week. And we don't want them to cram, right? So really like having an understanding of these principles in a way that we can build them into a course, so that even though this is the only time that we are like in the same room as them doing this skill, we still feel confident that they've actually learned the skill, mastered the skill, are competent in the skill, and will be able to do it in our case, a year and a half later when they are licensed.
Yeah, I think you're speaking like real hard truth here. And in my work, working alongside programs that are developing and, consulting with different programs, one of the things I say about hybrid is that hybrid pathways expose weak curriculum, because there's just less give, there's less flexibility, there's less like, how do I cover my tracks? And so it can expose it really quickly, which was sort of fascinating.
Mm.
Eric, one other thing I was thinking about as everyone was talking was really this idea of, learning on your own, but then also learning in community. So,
Yeah.
Carly, you were mentioning doing some of these classes like as a one-off, maybe not much accountability afterward, versus these cohort models where you're going into a fellowship, or you're not even a formal fellowship, but just like the year-long, right, programs where you're actually with other people. And hearing us also talking about co-teaching and collaborative teaching models, that this idea of developing yourself as a faculty member being a social process, a collective process, I think has merit and is important for us as we keep thinking about how to create and develop these, supportive mechanisms to get faculty the resources they need and to help them really be excellent in the classroom. I just think that this ability to talk it out, to bring new ideas, to see instruction modeled by others is really beneficial, and is is something that people should think about and look at when they're trying to choose between different faculty development options and approaches.
Yeah, you know what I also think about with that is we've started our conversation, our story about like, okay, how did you start to teach? And that's fun, but there's also with that sort of an implication that I don't mean to carry forward, which is that faculty development is only for new faculty, right? And I think that's one of the things I see in all of the three of you is that you're continuing to take courses and consume content and always learn stuff. But a lot of it is through this community. So I think as you develop more, that community aspect might even get more important because then it's less about like, what's the discrete thing I need to learn? Like, what's this fact? And it's more about sharing ideas and, elevating each other through like a kind of a shared philosophical approach.
Yeah, community of practice.
Yeah.
And I'm realizing like, oh my gosh, before I didn't even mention, we've got conferences like ELC, right? That or the Education Leadership Conference every year that kind of says, oh, is this like a beginner or an intermediate or like what level topic is this? But this idea of there being limited resources for like mid-career and honestly, even right expert level, this is a profession of lifelong learning. We need to think about professional development along that whole continuum. So I love that point.
Yeah. Just as an aside, when Libby, when you were talking about building psychomotor skills, teaching psychomotor skills in a hybrid environment, and ELC were mentioning, I just popped in my head. I'm going to try to get these folks on the podcast. But at ELC, I went to a talk, and it was, I think the talk was called Hybrid Hands, and it was about delivering psychomotor skills at a distance in a hybrid environment. And the presenters were Mary Derrick Manis, Mike Anderson, Elizabeth Lane, Laura Wenger, and I cannot remember this person's name, but it was nice enough that they also brought a student with them who was learning through the Utah hybrid program to talk about how he felt when he was learning. And this presentation was phenomenal. And I feel like it represented best practice and skills acquisition because what they did is they not only spent a lot of time talking about all the thought that they went into to make the videos, but also they carried it through with the other pedagogical principles, sort of like intentional practice and reflection. And, it went from this, these esoteric concepts to all the way down to like, here's the exact time scale that we use during the immersion to reinforce these things and ensure people were ready. It was a phenomenal presentation. And so they're going to be getting some emails from me being like, come talk with us. It was great. So if you can hunt them down about that, definitely go do it. So there was another thing, like I guess to kind of loop back, I guess, Libby, you said this earlier. We talked about different levels for education. Like, what about like the ethics of not providing education to adjunct faculty? Like, that's kind of a thing that's common because they don't get a lot of the resources that core faculty do. I don't know. What do we think about this? Like, Carly, felt like you experienced this firsthand.
I have thoughts. Yeah, I was like, tag me in. Okay, so I think so. I was lucky in the way that when I started as an adjunct, it was for your course, Eric. So you were my mentor for that. But I think it depends where you land. I was thinking a lot about, at every institution, even though you might have really great potential for centers for excellence in teaching and other ways to gain knowledge, but it depends on where you land, which course. What is valued and prioritized by your leadership? Are they pushing you toward, hey, let's get you developed, let's get you trained? Because there are some courses where that's a big part of it. Like when during residency, and I know it was partially because we were getting mentorship, I had awesome mentorship through like Julie Hirschberg, Dee Dee Matthews. They were giving me feedback on my teaching and also giving me opportunity because I showed interest and wanted to develop more. So I got to do a little extra. And I think that really matters. But I think it depends. If you are not in a course where you're not getting that, that sort of push, because you don't know, at least for me, I didn't know what I didn't know. And I've always known that I think now I've confused myself, but like, I know that I don't know everything, right? I know that there's so many things and I love those moments of like, oh, wow, like I really don't know that. But I think sometimes getting a nudge towards something that will help educate you in a really helpful way. But knowing where to start is hard as new faculty. You don't know necessarily what are the steps I need to take to progress myself as an educator. So I think I figured that out, and again was lucky to have good mentorship. I know that's not the case. So I have a good friend who's at another institution, and it was, essentially clinicians that are being handed course director positions. They have zero experience in teaching, and there is very minimal mentorship. That's hard, and I feel like that should not be the case, especially with however much money I don't feel like our students should be paying so much money to get this education where maybe they're not getting instructed in the best way that they could be. And we all start somewhere, but I do think there needs to be some sort of mentorship and scaffolding so that students get a, robust and good experience with whatever faculty is in the room. So,
Yeah,
And some
I'll
of that,
also
I
add,
think,
oh, go ahead.
sorry, Elise. My comment is quick. Some of that comes from leadership, right? I think we, like division leadership, we are lucky enough at USC to be in a place where leadership has valued quality teaching. And like it's in our merit review, and we're pushed to develop in that way. And there are lots of places where that's not the case. It's like, just deliver the content and then tell us about your research and your grants. All right, go ahead, Elise. Sorry.
No, I was just going to add that I think what you're also bringing up here is that this idea of the adjunct as other has a very long history, and it's really only in, I think, the early part of the 2000s, even moving into 2010s, that you started to hear about this idea of like, wait a minute, the academe is for everyone. And so, a non-tenure track faculty, adjunct faculty should not be excluded from having a voice, being part of decision making, being in academic setting, right? And that there should be policies and procedures that help to lift and provide opportunities and resources. And if, you go and look at, you can just see this long history of adjuncts having, way too low pay, no access to resources, covering so many courses and just really being taken advantage of. And I do think that in general, higher ed is moving a little bit more so in the direction of at least this being on the radar as a larger institutional and so kind of like systemic problem. And there's some amazing work being done, including at USC by Adriana Kazar, really trying to look at and discuss, what does it mean to have all of the faculty members at the table? And how are we encouraging really collegial interactions across different members of the academe? Because again, Libby, I think your point about, hey, we value teaching, but we also value all the members of the community, and we do invite and have opportunities available. It might be hard for folks to access, but we try to make offerings available. And that just isn't the case, in all institutions and in all places. And we certainly still have ways to grow, right? But I do think at least there is an attempt to have people at the table.
Yeah. So I remember when I sat at a new faculty orientation one time, and not only was this like, adjunct as other, but I was coming in as a tenure track assistant professor. And there was a statement made at the orientation. Listen, if you're an assistant professor, when you go to your faculty meeting next week, I don't want you to speak. You're not supposed to speak as an assistant professor. And I was like, huh? I was like, oh, I better leave. And luckily that wasn't the culture in the department, right? That was just somebody, but that was at least in somewhere lived in the culture of the institution. It kind of blew my mind. Yeah.
These hierarchical structures are so challenging. And it's just like it's just the fabric of higher ed is this like role and title, and it can be really problematic.
And that's where systems can push you down, but they can also lift you up, right? So Libby mentioned that the reward of training and development was built into promotion and tenure review, into the merit review, right? So how powerful is that, right? You're putting your money where your mouth is, and you're saying, we value teaching, so show us. Here, we're giving you tools to learn, and then if you take advantage of those tools, now we're going to give you a reward. And it seems so simple. And I feel like that's one of the easiest places that a lot of institutions can adjust, like a really low hanging fruit is to like build in faculty development into the system of their processes and reward those positive behaviors.
Yeah, and the other really lovely thing about that at USC is this kind of quieting of student evaluations. Like, okay, they're a data point, but that's not going to be our sole metric of how faculty are evaluated. And yet instead growing this beautiful division on excellence in teaching, where there are other opportunities for evaluation through peer observation and peer review, and right, these other metrics are then valued and utilized as part of that merit process, because we all know student feedback is laden with issues, and to have that as the only metric for understanding what's going well, what's not going well, what needs to change is highly problematic.
Yeah, well, and you say we all know, but maybe we don't all know about what the problems are with student feedback. Like we know because we've been thinking about it and talking about it and learning it, right? But that's like a foundational concept for somebody who's
Mhm.
coming into teaching and learning how to do it and say like, okay, well, if you're female gender, then you probably have worse course reviews than all of your male colleagues, right? That's a data point about student reviews, right? About students who are angry, about students who are, had a bad day, they missed their donut that morning, right? There's just like a bunch of things with student evaluations, and learning the science of that and how you incorporate that, how you understand it is itself a powerful tool. So, there's so much to like learn at first, like, and I think that's a really good example of one that like,
Mhm.
boy, when I started student evals, like I was riding like a surfboard when I would read those student evals.
Right.
The one
Brutal.
of the the first, I think, constructive criticism does it just like it sits here forever a little bit, you're just like, oh, I'll never forget this. But um one thing that you mentioned, Elise, just thinking about some of the other opportunities for peer review, this is my hot take. I feel like it should be mandatory, because I feel like a lot of what like, we're all people that are like, yes, I want review, give me feedback. But that is not the case, right? That is not the case for everyone. And so I know some of these peer review processes are really lengthy, but I feel like something short and like maybe it's built in where like it's course faculty that are in leadership that are providing some of the review. But like I love the concept of things like that that are meant to be professional development in teaching for new faculty being built in as like this is the standard. And like that's my like we should get there. I hope we can, but I feel like something like that would be so helpful, because the other thing that I've been thinking about is time, right? So as a new adjunct, right, I was teaching, but I also had like a not quite full-time clinical job, but I also was in the clinic a lot. And I know that's the case for a lot of our faculty at USC that are adjuncts. They're full-time clinical and maybe getting some release time. So their time is limited to be able to do lots of faculty development. I'm one of those that I'm like, I'm going to do it anyway, and I'll just be like a little stressed out for a while. But some people might not want to make that choice. And so I feel like having things just like built right into the fabric of what the educational experience is would be super, super helpful.
Yeah, so like another system fix, right? Like,
Mhm.
what are some other low hanging fruits? Like we mentioned, okay, bring it into, rewarding and valuing in a promotion tenure track, the idea that you just professed. And so what are some other low hanging fruits that we might be able to like talk about to help enable reaching more people with faculty development?
One thing that I was just thinking about is this isn't a systemic change. Um, but, for listeners who maybe are in course director roles, leadership roles, who are thinking like, I don't know if this is feasible to be implementing this level of like peer review, for example. Um, for me, like finding little ways to do it that actually make sense as part of my already existing systems. For
Hmm.
example, um, I am in leadership for a course that Carly teaches in. And when I was reviewing it's an online course, reviewing recordings from the previous year to see, you know, if there were changes we wanted to make, blah, 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 I would watch Carly's recording and I would put in the notes for the next week, like, hey, anyone who wants to see what a good cold call looks like, or a
Mm.
great intro, or a way like, Carly's really good at warming up the unmute button. So like those kinds of things I put in there, like check out Carly's video at this time. And that acts as feedback for her in a way. And I think there are other little ways that you can just, you're reviewing the lesson plan or you're reviewing last week and saying, oh, well, last week was a disaster because of blankety blank. Let's make sure we change this. But also while we're here, Carly did a great job at whatever. Elise did, Eric, you
Yeah.
too. You also
Well,
did a great
thanks. I appreciate being included. Yeah. At
Yeah,
least
I'm
it looked like you
thinking
had something to say.
about.
Yeah.
Sorry, I did. Yeah, I'm thinking about the comment earlier about it. A lot of this faculty development being like a social process, and I'm also thinking about a little bit of what you were alluding to, Libby, with like time. And so I'm thinking about prioritizing time for talking, and it could be as formally informal as like a lunch, like come and let's just log into Zoom, or let's go to the conference room and chat once a quarter or like once a semester about what's going well and what's not in the classroom. It could be an item in a faculty meeting agenda, which is, hey, let's talk about teaching this week, and having one faculty member sharing something that they've done that was either successful or that they want feedback about. But by providing this expectation that talking about teaching is part of the culture, right? Or going back to your, just the smaller team meeting agendas, how is that included as part of your ongoing discussion? When when you show that the time spent in talking about teaching is valuable and you encourage conversation around it, I think then that permeates into change happening, having that kind of like ripple effect. And so at USC, we have these diet chats. So it's our Division Institute on Excellence in Teaching chats that are once a month. They happen at different times, all different types of topics. And it's just an opportunity. It's essentially like a community of practice where we come together. And yes, there's a topic that's being discussed, but there's an opportunity for us to think about, oh, well, that made me think about this, or what about that? And give us, again, dedicated time to come together and just talk.
Yeah. So it's just a question. I don't know if you know the answer to this. Does that diet chat group, does that have a budget? Are they able to bring in speakers, or like how does that go? Is that just like altruism, or is there like a movement for that?
It's a great question. To my knowledge, it's altruism. I
Yeah.
don't
I mean,
believe there's a budget.
that's like a interesting side of it, right? Like, but it speaks to culture, right? So it's worth that altruism because there's a culture where people are seeking that excellence, and it's like a shared community with a target in mind.
And I think the money that they put into it is that, for example, Dee Dee Matthews, who is, leadership in the division, is leadership of a big course. She takes a lot of her time to do that. And
Right.
so like they encourage that, right? It's not like she's doing it in her spare time.
Hmm.
And that those of us who attend or are part of that, again, like it goes on our merit review and it gets rewarded. So in that way, so I say that just to say, like, if you're out there and you're wanting to do a faculty chat and you don't have a budget and you don't have a way, you feel like you couldn't ask for that, ask for time, ask for recognition, ask for whatever else that can be still helpful in
Sure. The
starting.
institution can convey its value without having to give you dollars,
Yes.
right? They can give you time, which is dollars eventually, but yeah. So,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, I love it. I think, there's these, all of these things go around this culture, right? And there's a lot of ways that you can take really small steps to change culture. And if you're interested in adding more faculty development into the culture, I think that's probably a good question to ask. Like, what are all the things I could do to start changing culture? And, just kind of listening around, like just valuing time, spending time reflecting on your course, rewarding people for positive behaviors, right? Like giving people pats on the back, like little things like that, just helping kind of like elevate, like, it's really basic human behavior stuff, but it matters.
Absolutely does.
So I guess the last thing that is in my mind is about morale, right? Because to me, this discussion about faculty development is also a discussion about how you endure in the face of a challenging academic environment. Sometimes there's budget challenges, sometimes there's workload challenges. It can be not easy to be in academia, but I feel like this could be a pathway to boosting your morale and your resiliency at work. What do you think about that?
This is an interesting question, Eric. So I think depends on the day you get me. No, I'm kidding. I can actually, I'm thinking actually back to like early COVID, right, where everything moved to online, and suddenly, and we luckily, we at USC, and we already had developed our hybrid content, right? So it was a really easy shift for us. Well, not really easy, but easier than other
I
institutions to
felt
say, okay, like
I felt
let's,
very valued at that time.
yeah, exactly,
As
so
a
valued because I'm
as an
like, oh,
online
I already
instructor, I
do
was
this.
like,
Yeah,
we were the bee's knees.
we knew what to do, and like we all of a sudden I'm like, great, I'm teaching a million sections, but it's because I know how to do it, I can do it well. And so that felt really good when your particular content expertise and delivery models, like you knew what to do and could even train some of the other faculty not had traditionally been on the residential pathway. Now they're having to step online, how to do this well. And so at that time, super great, I think, because it felt super valued. And like now it's a little different with the sort of in the denouement of our hybrid pathway at USC. It's a little bit, the culture feels slightly different in terms of like what's being valued, I guess. And so finding my own value in that, though, like I still feel like as an educator, I've grown so much from like where I started, and that I think is a really, I can still take that with me, and that will the knowledge that I have and what I've learned, like wherever the next place is, I still have everything that I've gained along the way. So I'm having to kind of look more internally, I think, for that value, rather than like getting it from external sources, if that makes sense. So slightly different. And so morale, I would say, again, it's variable for some of us in this exact moment, but in terms of value and what I bring, that is still there. So I don't know if I answered the question, but that's sort of,
I don't know if
yeah.
there's an answer. I think it's just
Yeah.
a philosophical question. So
Yeah.
in that sense, you totally did.
Yeah.
I think too, like, it's sort of faculty development or even focusing on uh content delivery and the pedagogical strategies is sort of an equalizer, right? Because like we all went to PT school, like in this situation, right? We all went to PT school. We all went and practiced in various places. Some of us did residencies, some of us didn't. But and so on the actual like mastering of the content, right? Like we're all at different levels, but then we can all agree on this is the bar for the actual delivery
Mm.
and how we're going to encourage our learners to be learners, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean it almost makes me think about that paper that came out about excellence in PT teaching with talking around the central pedagogy. Right, we all can agree to the central pedagogy of teaching PT. That's
Mhm.
fascinating. At least I'm sure you have something to say about this in terms of like belonging and stuff central to your work here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think when you think about morale, that faculty development has a great way of finding connection, right, with others and with helping you helping to have an intentional kind of like stop and reflect point, that even if things are low or things aren't going the way that you had hoped, or you had a bad class session, or organizational change, whatever, that when you're engaged in faculty development and being put into this position of what did that person do? How does that relate to what I can do? It almost provides perhaps a bit of empowerment that, oh, right, I still have this potential to make a positive change in the whole reason why I'm here, which is to help my learners get the most out of the day, right? So, or most out of the content. So yeah, I appreciate that. Yes, there's definitely a link to like belonging and connection, but I think there's also just this really nice stop and reflect when that happens kind of naturally when you go to these types of events.
Yeah. And even just ELC, you meet and you talk to people at this conference and you're like, oh, what are you doing? And they, and just in casual conversation. I really like that a bunch too. And so, going to those conferences like that, they always fuel me. And this one fuels me in particular about education. So it was nice to go there. It was great. Carly and I got to have some really good coffee while we were there. And I also got to bring a baguette to the conference. So, yeah, I found a good baguette. I couldn't resist. And before I knew it, I was walking around ELC with a piece of bread. So a few people looked at me funny, but they knew.
Look at you being your authentic self.
Good. All right. Well, listen, I think we should wrap up today's session. I think we could keep going for another 2 hours about faculty development and all the things we're passionate about it. But, we have a couple other sessions to get through. There's a few other like final thoughts I had in my head. One of them is, one of the early episodes of this podcast, I had Dawn Brown and Scott Ward and Barb Sanders on, and we talked about the Blueprint for Excellence. And that's a wonderful text resource if people are interested in like learning more, just some like, how do I do some self-study? You mentioned some of the resources that the Education Academy has, ACAP, ELC. There's a lot of things out there. We mentioned some other things. There are some faculty residencies. So, I think, and our work, your work with Trellis, our work with Brainsmith, I think we're after this as a central core mission. So, stay
tuned. There's a great book, Eric, Teaching and Learning in Physical Therapy.
Yeah, it has a wonderful author. Yeah. So she Perfect. So thank you for putting that up there. And we'll put definitely a link to it in the show notes too. So, yeah. So I just want to say thanks for the chat. This was a good time. I'm looking forward to the next few that we do. And everybody, thanks for joining another episode of PT Outcast.